I'm so excited to show you 3 sourdough recipes that have become my family's favorites. The first is a nice sandwich loaf, which you'll need that recipe to do the second recipe, which will be pizza loaf, and it is by far our family's favorite thing for me to do with sourdough. Third, it'll be our pita bread. That's something that's in our house weekly. I always have my pita bread waiting to be made up in the refrigerator. And I'm going to share my secret with you for keeping my pita bread nice and soft. I'm going to be making the 1 loaf of sourdough bread. It's found on page 12 of the ebook. First, we're going to get started with a 1/2 cup of sourdough starter. This starter has been fed about 12 hours ago, and so I like to use a hungry starter when I start making my bread. Then next we're going to put 3/4 cup of warm water. And for video purposes, I'm also going to be using yeast in this recipe. In the ebook, it does give you the amounts of yeast to use to make your rise a little bit faster, but it will not affect the outcome if you don't use yeast. It will just take longer to rise. Then you'll put 2 tablespoons of sugar and 1½ teaspoons of salt and get that stirred in good. Also, I want to say you could be using your stand mixer if you wanted to. And then 1/4 cup of oil. It has sourdough starter, warm water, sugar, yeast, salt, and oil. And you just want to have that mixed together a little bit. And then next you'll start with your flour. All the mixing up of sourdough is really not that different from mixing up just regular yeasted bread. The difference is adding your sourdough starter in, and that gives it that wonderful, wonderful aroma. All right, I put 1 cup of flour in. You're going to use a total of about 3 cups. And I'm just going to put about another 1/2 cup in and get this stirred together. And when it starts getting a little too thick, but not real runny, that's when you'll have to put your hands in. Go ahead and add the rest of that 1/2 cup. Sourdough bread is really simple to make, and you'll find lots of simple, easy recipes in the ebook. I don't know why some people are very intimidated by sourdough bread, but you'll find my recipes in the book simple. The ingredients are the ingredients that you have at your house. And like I said, even if you don't have yeast, you can still make sourdough bread. All right, this is my last cup, and I'm just going to add this gradually. That was about a 1/2 cup I added in, and I'm just going to kind of move this around in the bowl to try and get the flour kind of up under my dough. And now I'm going to go in and knead with my hands. A lot of people knead their dough out on their counter, and if that's the way you're used to kneading dough, that's fine. I feel like it makes less mess inside the bowl, so I just keep it in the bowl. And I'm just turning it over and pushing it down. Each time, turn it over, push it down, and pull in each side, push it down. And as you're doing that, you're actually kneading your dough, and you're incorporating more flour. I also tell you in the book, there's some quick tips in the book because, you know, different environments are different. You know, I put in the recipe for 3 cups of flour. Sometimes you may not need the whole 3 cups of flour. Sometimes you may need more. Just when I think I'm going to need more flour because it's so humid down here in Mississippi, I end up using a little less flour. So you kind of go with the feel of your dough. And that's something you'll learn over time. If you have too much flour in your dough, it'll make it a very, very stiff, dry loaf. And if you don't have enough, it'll be a dough that you can't really work with, that may not rise like it should. And this is good exercise, a good workout. Also, you need to use care if you are using a mixer to be checking your dough often. What I kind of use as a gauge is as the dough starts pulling away and forming a ball and not sticking to the sides anymore, you need to check it because it's very easy to over mix your dough in a mixer and also mix in too much flour. So you have to be very, very watchful. It's different than when you're doing it with your hands and you're feeling how the dough is. You see, it's coming together nicely, but when I touch it like that, it's still real sticky. So I'm going to keep incorporating my flour. I'm down to about 1/4 cup of flour left in my cup now. And I'm just pushing down. I'm not turning it right now. I'm just kind of working that flour in. And then I'll turn it completely, fold it in half. And then I'll start my folding again. There's different techniques to making bread and to kneading your dough. And you'll need to find what's easiest for you. This is what I have found is easiest for me. Now I'm just wiping my dough around, getting flour on all sides. And I'll go back to kneading it a little bit, just pushing my fingers into it, just kind of flattening it out. And as it gets a little sticky is when I'll fold it over, that top piece over, and keep kneading. And that's what people, you know, when I remember when I first started doing bread, it was a little intimidating thinking, oh, you have to knead it for 5 minutes or for 10 minutes. And it's really, as you're doing it, you're feeling your way of what you need, what more you need to do, what more flour you need to add. You see, I've gotten, it's kind of floury still on top here. I don't want it floury right now. If I wanted to make a dough, a loaf that had the flour look on it, I would accomplish that at my second rise. I would do that. Put a little flour on my dough. But right now I'm trying to just incorporate the flour into the dough. All right, I am going to my fist now. I'm just pushing it down with my fist. And I'll just turn it. Half turn. And I'll do a half turn again. And it's picking up the rest of that flour in the bottom of the bowl. And some's up on my side, so I'm going to scrape it down and turn it over. And so, a nice dough, and it'll do some work while it is rising, and it will really come together nicely. And pick up any last little bits of flour that's in there and work it in. But if you can see, now it's not so sticky. And it's bouncing back when I push it with my finger. So it's ready to rise. So what I do, I'll run my fingers around my bowl to get any big little hunks off of there. And I'll just dump that right there. And then you want to take some oil. And you're going to oil your bowl really good. In fact, that's not quite enough. About a teaspoon of oil will work. And you'll rub that all around your bowl, all the way up to the top. And then you're going to set your dough in your bowl. And I push it down, and then I turn it over. You see I've got an oil coating on the top, and then I push it down again. And then I'll cover this with saran wrap. You could use a dish towel if you'd like. Just whatever you have. And I cover my bowl, and I'll let this rise until it doubles in volume. Depending on if you use yeast or not in your sourdough bread, it depends on how much yeast you add too. It will take anywhere from an hour to 12 hours to rise. If I'm making my bread without the yeast, I usually make my dough up at night, and then I'll put it into loaves in the morning where it can rise overnight. Okay, now after your dough has risen, you're going to remove your plastic wrap. And you're just going to knead it down a little bit with your hands. I like to turn it over a bit, like that. You can see how the texture has changed through that rising. And what you do is you just take it, and the way I do it is I take it and rock it in my hands, because I like a nice rounded top to my bread. And so it's going to grow however what shape you put it in. And so I just rock it and I pinch it together like that underneath. And there was plenty of oil around the edges of my dough. If there wasn't, I would have put a little oil on my hands. But you see, my hands are plenty oily from the bread. And I'll just rock it one more time just to get a nice smooth texture on top. Oh, I didn't spray my bread pan. You got to spray your bread pan. Let me rock it one more time. And I'm pinching it together good and hard under the bottom. And it's okay that it doesn't fill up the bread pan right now. It will. It was going to grow and rise. Now, if you would rather a flat top loaf, what you would do instead of doing what I just did, after you knead it down a few times, put it in your bread pan and then flatten it down. And then that way it'll grow up pretty much the same and not have the rounded top. So we'll let this rise sitting here on the counter for about another hour. If you're not using yeast, that can go from anywhere from 4 to 12 hours. All right, now that my bread has risen, I'm gonna bake it at 350 for 30 minutes. I have in the book to 25 to 30 minutes. It's always best to check it a little early just to make sure, because all ovens are different. The bread turned out nicely. It had a good, nice rise on it. One thing I'd like to share with you is that if you only have 1 or 2 people in your family, what you can do is use the mini loaf pans and put the dough in it and go ahead and bake it and everything, and then put it in the freezer. You know, use 1 loaf and then take out a loaf as you need it. One thing I like to do is put a little butter on top of mine. It makes it where it doesn't have a hard crust on it. So I do this right when it comes out before I take it out of the pan. Just a little bit like that. And then I like to take it directly out of the pan as soon as I get it out the oven, because I don't like it to sweat in the pan. All right, now that my dough is risen, I'm going to take it out. It's nice and pliable. And I'm going to lay it on my baking sheet here. Start flattening with my hands. And I have parchment paper on my baking sheet. If you don't have parchment paper, you can just oil your sheet. Anyway, I have this little rolling pin. And I'm gonna roll it out. It wasn't wanting to stick to my hand, but it wants to stick to my rolling pin. This is such a treat for us. We haven't had this in a while, and I have been really craving it. At this point, you could go ahead with your sauce and your cheese, but I prefer to add some slits to it. And so I'm going to show you how I do that right quick. I just take a knife and I just make some slits. You want to make sure you don't come into the middle of your dough. And you don't want to make them too small, so they're almost 3 fingers wide. And I'm leaving my ends solid. I guess I should be matching it up like this. Okay, I'm pretty matched up. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and top with my pizza sauce. And I have made homemade pizza sauce, and it's a little bit runny. And I'm going to tell you this too, that I do put pepperonis on these. I have done the onions and bell pepper, and I really don't care for it so much with the onions and bell pepper. So you could try it both ways and see what you think. And honestly, cheese is my favorite, just cheese. And I typically like pepperoni, but and I like this okay with pepperoni, but my favorite is just cheese. So that's what we're doing. 1, we don't have any pepperonis, and 2, it is my favorite. So, and I see my sauce is a bit on the runny side. All right, then you're going to take, this is white sharp cheese. You're just going to top that on here. And you know, I put in the recipe to use a cup of cheese. Do whatever you like. If you like a little bit of cheese, put a little bit. If you like a lot, put a lot. It's just to your taste. It's not going to affect the recipe. What's going to affect this is my little runny pizza sauce, though, I'm afraid. It may not be so pretty when it gets done. It's kind of hard to tell how much mozzarella I'm putting since I did have the white sharp cheese. All right, then you're going to pick up your sides, bring it together, and I just roll it down. Or you can pick it up and twist it. I think that's what I've done before. And I kind of pinch them together where they kind of are together on the top. That way it kind of stays together. And then you just bring your ends and just kind of roll them in, because you definitely want that end to be sealed. And the end piece may not have quite as much as the good stuff in it as the rest. There we go. And I'm going to go ahead and top it with my cheese. And see, this is ready to go in the oven as soon as it rises some. You don't have to let this rise till it's doubled. You can, but you don't have to. Then it'll be ready to bake. I don't put a whole lot of cheese on top. Well, sometimes I do. But I guess it just depends on your mood and what you're doing. All right, don't this look wonderful? Now, it has risen, and I'm very pleased with the way it has done. And I was worried about my sauce coming out a little bit, but just a very little bit has it come out on the paper. So Anyway, just remember that. Try and have a little thicker pizza sauce, but this has worked out good. So I'm going to bake it in a 350-degree oven, 20 to 30 minutes. Well, I'm very, very pleased. I wish we had smell-o-vision because it smells so good. It turned out wonderful. Now here's a trick or some advice about the pizza loaf. As hard as it is, we've learned this from experience, you have to let this cool for about 10 to 15 minutes. Number one, it is so hot. Number two, when you slice it, it makes the insides want to just come out. So you want to let this cool off just a little bit before you slice it. And so I actually have it on a cooling rack right now, and I'm going to let this cool, and I'll show you how it looks once we cut it. Well, now's the time. Like I said, it was so hard waiting for this to cool. And again, this is called Patty's Spectacular Pizza Loaf, and it's on page 25 of my ebook. And it is one of our favorites. There you go. And it is delicious. The first thing you're going to need is 1 1/4 cup of warm water, 1/2 cup of starter, 1 1/2 teaspoons of salt, and I am going to use some yeast today because of filming. It will make the process go a lot faster. So I'm going to put in a little yeast, and I actually have a little yeast written down in the book. That is totally optional. This is a 1 rise sourdough, and yes, I looked for a prettier bucket to use, but honestly, this is what I use when I make it for us. So I'm reusing an ice cream bucket that we had ice cream in. So anyway, that's what I like to use. So this is going to be a fairly sticky dough, and that's all the ingredients except for the flour, and I'm using all-purpose flour. You can use bread flour or all-purpose flour. And it takes a total of 3 cups, and I'm going to go ahead and put in 2 right now. And I will stir this up, and you see it's still very, very wet. And I'm going to add in a little bit at a time from my last cup of flour because you want to keep this a wet dough. I've actually made this in Missouri one time, and it actually did not stay as wet as it does here. So you're going to need to look at your environment. And you're going to just want this to be more of a moist dough, not a dry dough. It's not a dough that you would be able to pick up and knead. You don't have to knead this pita bread. Now, I'm going to show you. It's very, still very sticky. I don't want it that sticky. I'm going to add a little more flour, and I'm just going to keep adding flour as I go till I get the right consistency. What's so nice about this pita dough, once you let it have the first rise, you can make pita bread with it right away, or you can put a lid on it. That's why I like doing it in this container, because I never make all of this at one time. You put your lid on your container and put it in the refrigerator. And whenever you're ready to make pita, you have your dough ready for you. It literally takes, I don't even know if it takes 5 minutes to make one pita. And so I keep this in the refrigerator, so if I don't have bread made, we just have a wrap for lunch. It's still a little too wet. So I'm going to use my last 1/4 cup of flour and just stir it in. Like I said, there's no kneading of this. It's just stirring the flour in. And I do let this rise one time, and then, like I said, it's ready for the refrigerator. Or it's ready to make your pita bread, whichever you want to do. And this will make a lot of pita bread, and this will stay good in the refrigerator for about a week. My dough is ready. And I'm going to tell you this too, as it's in the refrigerator, when I make it today, I will have to use quite a bit of flour as I'm rolling it out. I find that the longer it's in the refrigerator, it may dry out a little bit, so you don't have to use maybe quite as much flour. But anyway, I want you to see how it looks if you can. It's a very sticky dough. So that's the consistency we want. And now I'm going to let this rise. It's going to take this dough about an hour to rise till it's doubled. If you're not using yeast, it could take, 3, 4, 5 hours, depending on how active your starter is. Now, I'm going to put my lid on it, and I'm not going to seal it. I'm just going to place it on the top where it can still get some air and let it rise till it's doubled. All right, I have my pita dough risen. It rose up very good. See that in there? So This is the hardest part about this dough. It's still rather sticky. You see it's on my fingers here. And like I said, after it's been in the refrigerator, it's not near as sticky as it is now. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna pinch up a little flour and sprinkle it on the dough. I guess I ought to do it on this side, maybe you can see, where you wanna pick it up. You don't have to deflate this dough. In fact, if you were gonna refrigerate it, just put it straight in the refrigerator. All right, I'll dip it in a little bit of flour. And I'm gonna flour my board. Of course, you can't see that because my board is white. And y'all, I'm gonna tell y'all, I have tried and tried to make pita bread through the years because we like pita bread, but I've just not found a recipe where the dough is nice and pliable and that you can do it. All right, now I'm using a lot of flour. Let me switch cutting boards and that will work a lot better. And you're gonna have to put flour on your rolling pin too. And I have not mastered having pretty pitas every time. Sometimes they turn out nice and pretty and round, and sometimes they're kind of funny looking, but you know what? They taste wonderful. All right, now, got that, and they're gonna be floury, that's okay. All right, I'm gonna show you the pan that I use. If you don't have a pan like this, it's okay. You can just use any heavy pan, even just a regular cast iron pan will be fine. I picked this up at the store. I got it for 10 bucks. And so it's not any fancy name cast iron, but it's cast iron and it works great. All right, so I have my pita ready. And the thing is you don't want to get this too thin. And I've used plenty of flour on here. That way I was able to pick it up. So I'm gonna set it back here to be cooking and we'll roll out a few more. I sprinkle my flour, like I said, on my dough and I stick my fingers in to kind of cut the dough. And I just pick me out a dough ball. That one was a little small. And I'm just gonna dip it in my flour to get plenty of flour on it. Make sure my board has plenty of flour. And I start out with my hands, just smushing it out, flattening it out. Stay using plenty of flour. And you can tell when you need to add more flour because your rolling pin will start sticking and also it will stick to whatever surface you're working on. Also, for a quick pizza, I do these, I'll roll these out and cook them, not quite all the way. And then I use some pizza sauce and cheese and put them in the toaster oven. And they make wonderful little pizzas too. It's kind of starting to bubble on top. Sometimes I just take it with my fingers and just flip it over. But I do have a spatula here. If you see this one, it's really, I don't know if you can tell on the camera or not, but it's not near browned enough. So I'm gonna cook it on that side again. And you know, this is just trial and error. You may see that they're a little thick and you want them a little thinner. I think that one's a little thick. And so you can roll them just a little bit thinner. But I find that I'm kind of taking my time right now, and so I'm not having as hard of a time making it more in a round shape. Usually mine do turn out oblong, but you know, it's still good. We also love hummus, and so I make these homemade to eat with our hummus also. I'm gonna go ahead and roll out another one. See how sticky? It's just very, very sticky. Now this is kind of messy, but it is just flour, so it's an easy cleanup. So you can see it's stuck right there, but I just take my fingers and kind of scoot it like that to get it unstuck. All right, let me check this one. And see, that turned out really nice. My goal is always to have my next one rolled out by the time it's time to put it on there. It works out pretty good. Here's a tip I'd like to share with you, that as I'm making my pitas, I place them on a plate. And I also put a lid from my pot over them. It keeps them warm and pliable for whenever you're done. Wait, that's not all. If you enjoyed watching these recipes, click the link below right now and see our most popular sourdough recipe.